This episode is brought to you by the Sasquatch Flag Company. The Sasquatch Flag Company is a family-owned business in New England that builds hand-carved American flags from seasoned white pine. Each flag is hand-built and each star on the flag is hand-hammered and chiseled. No two flags are alike. They offer a variety of flag designs to honor the police, military, firefighters, dispatchers, and search and rescue personnel, to name a few. These stunning handmade flags look great in an office, a studio, the back porch, or above the fireplace mantle. They make the perfect gift for the veteran, first responder, or patriot in your life. Now, I love these flags, and I've been giving them as gifts for years, and I was a customer long before they became a sponsor of the show. I can't recommend them enough. So if you're looking for that perfect, uniquely American-made gift to give away, or if you want to treat yourself, go to sasquatchflags.com and get your order in today. Welcome to the Deep Leadership Podcast. Today I'm joined by Marty Strong. Marty has been a leader and business consultant for decades, first in uniform as a combat decorated Navy SEAL, and then in commercial business. He is a thought-provoking author, speaker, and leadership expert. Marty's latest book is called Be Visionary: Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization. Now, this book helps leaders think and lead more strategically. And I'm excited to have him on the show to talk about the idea of strategic leadership. So, Marty, welcome to the show.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
It's an honor to have you, sir. And I'm interested in this topic of strategic leadership. So, and who better to get on the show but the guy that just wrote the book on it. So I'm really excited about this. But I wanted to dive in first a little bit about your career. You spent 20 years as a Navy SEAL, and then you went into business. Tell us about your background and how your military experience shaped you as a leader.
So interestingly, the one thing kind of leads into the other in life. My favorite quote is from Louis Pasteur. It's chance favors the prepared mind. And the way my life has turned out, it always seems to be the case. The thing that I'm training to, that the way I'm being treated, the way I'm dealing with adversity that I don't appreciate at the time suddenly becomes the strength later on that I needed. And the lessons that I learned that I had to apply in a completely different place, in a different, maybe sometimes a different vocation. So I've kind of learned to just roll with it. I came out of a broken family, divorced kid. So I had a lot of psychological resilience, not appreciating it, obviously, as a kid. And all of a sudden I'm in SEAL training. It turns out that the people that make it through SEAL training or any special operations selection course tend to be really, really high on the psychological resilience scale. And so if I hadn't gone through that, I probably wouldn't have made it through SEAL training. I wouldn't have been psychologically, I guess, inoculated against self-doubt and a lot of the other things that I had to deal with as a teenager. Finally had to come to grips with and decide I'm going to be my own person. I'm going to chart my own path. And so when other people are telling you to quit, or other people around you are quitting and trying to talk you into quitting, it just never resonated with me. So that allowed me to get through the SEAL process. I was a SEAL for 10 years as an enlisted SEAL, got my undergraduate degree in business during that time frame. And then I went to Officers Canada School, spent the next 10 years as an officer in the SEAL teams, and again, ended up getting my master's in management during that time frame. So that's kind of the quick version of those 20 years. And I was going to be a lawyer, took the LSAT, that I was going to do that. A friend of mine who was in financial services talked me out of it. And again, I know we're going to talk about strategy and being strategic. I was all over the place. So I said, yeah, the heck with the, law school. I'm just going to go do this, and I ended up with one company for a couple of years, and then shifted over to United Bank of Switzerland, became a portfolio manager and managed money and clients and things like that, all in for about 7.5 years in that industry. And again, I realized when I started, I didn't know how to sell. I'd never been taught how to sell. It wasn't in it wasn't in my undergrad course. It wasn't my graduate course. There wasn't a class on how to sell anything. And anybody that's in civilian life knows that that's kind of key to getting anything across, even if you're just trying to get somebody to marry you. So I had to learn how to sell. And then as I was struggling to figure out how to sell, a guy came in who was a mutual fund wholesaler, and he said, "What are you doing? How are you doing it?" I said, "I'm cold calling all day long, and I'm walking the roads and knocking on doors, and I'm doing, conventions. I'm doing everything I'm supposed to do, I think." And he said, "Have you ever done seminars?" Well, no, I don't have any. I don't know anybody yet. He goes, "Well, we'll help you out. We'll buy you a list, and then we'll show you how to do the invitations and all that kind of stuff." and we'll even stand up there with you in the first one and kick it off. And he did. It turns out I was really good at seminars because I was really good at public speaking. I'd been a trainer. I'd been a trainer in the schoolhouse, in the SEALs. I was one of the main briefing officers at one time for the admiral in charge of all the SEALs. I'd go on road shows and everything. I'd been to 36 combat missions, and I had to do at least 20 high-end briefings. You know, Colin Powell, lots of people. I was very comfortable doing that, even though I didn't know how to sell. And it turned out people didn't care about the sell pitch. They just wanted to trust the person in front of them.
That's
And
it.
so here I was again. I was doing well in this profession because of something that I didn't understand. I thought all those dog and pony trips all over the place for the Navy were just a big pain in the ass. I never saw any value to it. I wanted to be back with the guys with the guns and everything. And lo and behold, there you go. Chance favors the prepared mind.
Yeah, exactly. You mentioned, your upbringing and how that prepared you to deal with the rigors of SEAL training, and then your experiences in the SEAL training help you be successful in the business world. It's really interesting that the parallels with that. And again, it's no surprise that quote is your favorite, because it seems
Yeah,
like it's made sense in your life.
it
Yeah.
has. It really has.
For sure. What were some of the differences you noticed when you did 20 years in the military, and there's a certain way we do things in the military, right? And then you come out into these, companies, civilian companies, you're dealing now with maybe not a lot of veterans, not a lot of people with military experience. What was that like for you? And what were some of the early frustrations you had in the business world? Because I know I had some of those myself when I first came into the world.
I think the first thing that hit me was the source of motivation to show up. For an average person in commercial business, and there's nothing wrong with this. This is just the way it's supposed to be for regular people, right? Your point is to make a living, to pay your bills, to have enough to have fun, take care of your family. And if you don't own the business, that's pretty much your motivation, right? And in the military, especially like, you're in the submarine service, that's an elite service, the SEALs, you're in a much smaller, highly selected kind of group of people. So they're already down selected for certain attributes. And one of them is being very motivated, self-motivated. They don't need a lot of pushing and pulling and coaching and speeches to get them fired up. They all focus on the mission, and they all focus on making each other stronger. Because the stronger each of them are as an individual and as a team, the stronger the unit, the more likely they're going to complete the mission, which is the whole motivation. And not in a kind of a World War II black and white movie kind of way where you just salute and do it because you're being ordered to. There's an intrinsic passion to be that good and do that well as an individual and as a group. Not in existence in most of the rest of the it just, and I get it. I mean, we're not asking people to make decisions about God and country and life and limb and all that. It's the consequences of failure, or money, maybe you'll lose your job, but that's nowhere near as bad, right? You do run into people, especially people that are business owners, that are passionate like that. And unfortunately, they have a hard time getting anybody else to be as fired up, because not everybody else has their home equity stuck in the new company that you're hoping it turns out. They're there to be an employee. So that was a big one. The second one, which I actually found out, even though I wasn't running a company yet, my clients, they really needed leadership in crisis. Every time the market would go down, my phone would blow up. And later on, when I had as many as 1,600 accounts, on a bad day or a bad week, I mean, my phone would blow up, and people would just show up at the door. They wanted hand holding, they wanted explanations, they wanted me to make them feel better, they wanted me to explain, because it was at a time where it was the TV pundits were really getting in everybody's face and making crazy predictions just to get eyeballs on screens.
Right.
And it was very frustrating because they were making things up, or they were saying things, and they're still doing it today. I watch CNBC in the morning, and I listen to it, and it's kind of interesting. I look more for the big picture moves rather than listening to their opinion of it. But I realized, other than being able to communicate and give seminars and garner trust, the other attribute that came over from being a SEAL was leadership in crisis, poise under pressure and stress. I could sit there in a room and they'd be freaking out, and they'd look at me, and I'd be chill, and I'd be okay. And I'd walk them through their plan. And by the time I was done talking about the plan that we put in place to deal with things like this, like asset allocation and all this stuff, they go, wow, I'm so glad I came here. I'm so glad I talked to you. I'm so glad I came here and gave you my money, and they'd walk out. And that would be exhausting for me, but that was another skill set. And it was always, it was surprising to me how fragile these people were when it came to risk. Now, everybody's got a different opinion about money, and it's very
Right.
emotional. But most of my clients were self-made people. They didn't get it in the lottery. They actually built businesses and gone through, but this is the kind of stress they weren't prepared for.
Hmm. Interesting. It's funny because I do hire a lot of veterans, over the years, and one of the reasons I like veterans is because of that reason, that typically they have been through worse. So the problems we face in business are minor compared to some of the things they've been through. And I think, a lot of times I always say, like, the some of the things I went through in the Navy were I've never experienced anything like that in the civilian world. So it's like it's almost like at the high water mark, you've done this. So what you're being asked to do now is so much less than that. So you feel like I've got that ability to overcome this because I've done something in my past that has been
Yeah.
challenging.
It
Yeah.
I still put it in that psychological resilience. You build up scar tissue in categories as you're exposed to that. And if you haven't been exposed to that category, you suffer, and then you get over it, and then you get stronger, and then you have scar tissue. And
Yeah.
then you can't really be hurt in that category. And yeah, I got SEALs working for me, and something really bad happens to a business, whatever. The first thing that comes out of almost anybody's mouth is, well, at least nobody's shooting at us,
Yeah.
to prove your
Yes.
point. It's actually something people say out loud on a regular
Yeah.
basis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We will say, like, well, at least it's not coming up to periscope death in the middle of a winter storm, right? So exactly.
Yeah.
So I love it. So I wanted to we're going to talk about strategic leadership, but I wanted to touch on your first book a little bit because you talk about something in that first book. It's kind of interesting. That first book is called Be Nimble: How the Creative Navy SEAL Mindset Wins on the Battlefield and in Business. I just thought it would since you're on the show, to explain a little bit of what that creative Navy SEAL mindset is and what it looks like, because I think that's kind of special.
So put it as quickly as I can. SEALs and other special operations elite forces are not the cartoon character you see in TV and in the movies. What they are, which is counterintuitive to most people, is they have very, very high IQs. They have very, very high aptitude scores, equal to things like missile technicians, fire control technicians, at the very top of what the Navy looks for their high-tech systems. They have high emotional IQ. They are very, very clever. They're really, really good problem solvers. And they are, for the most part, willing to apply their imagination to almost any set of problems or issues and work it from an open mind to when you have some kind of a conclusion you can act on. And if you get a whole group of them in a room, especially as an officer, and I had a little bit of a head start on this because I'd been on the other side of the process, you have to let everybody kind of brainstorm and throw a lot of stuff up on the wall, see what sticks, and then you start to crystallize it, more facilitating all that input, and eventually get it down to, okay, we only have so much more time before we have to make a decision on what we're going to do. And then you up with some kind of a multi-phase plan that everybody feels pretty comfortable with. But everybody can participate. The most junior guy, doesn't matter how much time he has. There may be 3 combat veterans, but they may be, from a desert war, and we're talking about something that's going to happen in the jungle. So it's a moot point that they were in combat. And then you don't get, it's unconventional warfare. So you don't get the same mission every single solitary time for the most part. You get a new problem set. So you really can't do it any other way. And you really can't do it with another kind of person or kind of brain. You have to have that kind of a mindset. So then, and they didn't have a lot of movies and TV shows and stuff about SEALs, even books until the late 90s. So you can imagine all of us that were in that, and the cartoon kind of character, that we're all like hyper aggressive, and we're always high-fiving and grinning and wearing beards and tattoos and stuff. And it's kind of this weird caricature. That's not it at all. And so in Be Nimble, I was trying to take that mindset, which is a creative mindset. It's a divergent thinking type mindset. And it's breaking and bending rules and maybe making up your own rules to get to the solution. It's having the adaptability, the flexibility, the nimbleness to do the same process all over again, maybe in a much more compressed time frame, when some of your core assumptions are gone or completely eroded when you actually show up on the target, which is about 85% of the time, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
You get there and it's not what they told you, it's not what you thought, and you either have to abort or you have to decide, How are you going to do it a different way? It's like pick up basketball, but you go through the same process. And I've applied that to business. I've applied that in all my coaching, mentoring to everybody that's ever worked for me and anybody that's ever asked me for advice to help them, because you also have to be open to everybody being involved in the decision-making process as an input or an insight. I'm not talking about crowdsourcing the decision. I'm talking about crowdsourcing the information, resources, the insights, and the creativity part of it. At some point, somebody's got to make the call. And it worked in the SEAL teams. It's worked in almost every company I've been in. Whenever I was in charge of a division, eventually a company, now I'm in charge of like 4 companies. And not everybody's comfortable with it, but it works. And so I try to put it all in one place, and that's what Be Nimble was all about.
That's fantastic. And you know, that's why I want to touch on it real quick, because I think it's really valuable information. You know, I'm 7 years into a business startup. We started a manufacturing business 7 years ago. And I can tell you all those skills we needed to have, because our plans changed. I mean, we wrote a business plan, right? Got the investment dollars. We opened up a factory, and guess what? Everything changed, right? The economy was different. We went into product lines that didn't work. We had customers that wouldn't open the doors for us. And the assumptions that we had didn't work. And so we had to be creative along the way, because there was 10 of us, you know, and we had to figure it out. And I think that's a powerful book and a powerful story. And I think those are skills especially needed for entrepreneurs when you're
absolutely
very limited resources, and you have, you know, a limited runway of funds to be able to get your business off the ground. You might have to change your plans along the way. So I just want to touch on that, because I think it's a fascinating read, and I want to encourage the listeners to take a look at that book as well. But I want to dive into strategic leadership, because I think that is another element. It's one that we haven't talked about on the show yet, and I'm interested in it. And so your latest book is called Be Visionary: Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization. So I wanted to just say, you know, you wrote this other book about the creative Navy SEAL mindset, and now you switched over to strategic leadership. So why the switch? What was the inspiration for writing this new book?
So it's kind of a 1-2 punch. Be Nimble is very much into the existing leader or aspiring leader, and how they can handle the stress and crisis of making decisions, either scaling up, scaling down for internal reasons, like you decided you want to double market share and everybody's got to work twice as hard with the same infrastructure, or things are going really well and you suddenly have to double infrastructure and you don't know how to do that because you've never done that before, all those kinds of things. Also, if something external impacted the business and you have to deal with that in some way, whether it's a competitive pressure, something like the pandemic, whatever, supply chain, you know, crisis. And one of the chapters touches on thinking big picture and thinking long view. And one of my beta readers, who's a CEO of a technology company, he has like 19 patents under his name. He said you could make an entire book out of that chapter, because nobody's teaching that. They're not teaching it, kind of like sales. They're not teaching applied strategic development, applied strategic leadership, or strategic decision-making processes in college. They're not teaching it in industry. You get to the top, this is the quote, you get to the top or somewhere near the top of an org chart where suddenly somebody says, this is one of your roles, and they go.
Right.
And you start buying books or talking to somebody else you think might know how to do it. And so and there's a reason for it. There's a reason why it's not emphasized. And it was emphasized much, much more in the 20s and 30s and the 40s. Part of it is that the reason I juxtapose the strategic leadership against optimization is that optimization has been empowered and enabled by technology. So you can get a dashboard. It can tell you exactly how your company did last week, last quarter, against last year, same quarter, all that. And in the rearview mirror, you've got very high accuracy of what your trail looks like, right? You have nothing telling you what the future looks like.
Yeah.
So if you start to be trained in management school, because they do teach optimization in college and they do teach optimization in industry, management starts to think that their job is to become better and better and better, more optimized about what happened. And the more they can explain that, the more they get patted on the head that they're in control of their business. And then when they have to think about next year, somebody says, well, what about next year's budget? They take this year, they flop it forward and add 3%.
Every time.
And they go, there you
Yeah.
go. And, past this prologue, that's it. And that's not really strategic thinking. So what I called it be visionary, because I go through as a primer. First, you have to be comfortable being visionary, which means you have to be willing to dream and allow your people to dream and come
Mm.
up with crazy ideas and come to you with all kinds of interesting kind of, in a state of wonder about what could we do with this company, or what do you think the industry is going to do? What do you think? And not about tomorrow, but like in 2 years or 3 years. And I tell people in the book, you envision what you look like. You do this every day, 10 minutes a day. Spend 10 minutes a day, clear your mind of all your to-do lists, all your problem solving, and just say, what do I want to be personally in 2 years? What do I want to look like? What do I want to feel like? What do I want to be professionally? And if you own a business, or you're in charge of a business or division large enough that you have a strategic responsibility, what do I want that to look like? And what happens is, as you start to practice this, like any habit, it changes the way you think and the way you look at things every day. So when somebody comes to you and they line up 10 problems and they're all equal in weight, and it's all about the metrics and how the metrics are going to look and everything, you're actually looking at it about, does it even matter? What does that got to do with what we have to deal with that's coming up on the horizon, whether it's a threat or an opportunity? So many threats are seen at the last second. And so everybody seems to be happy with reacting because they think that's the way you're supposed to. And nobody's going to say that I'm a bad leader because something just popped up. Well, you're a bad leader if you never anticipated. If you didn't train your staff, if you don't have enough redundant leadership, you don't have enough redundant key personnel. If you're one person short, you're one heartbeat away from disaster in that particular function or that particular talent area. You can be blamed as a leader. You're not preparing for anything other than tomorrow's gonna be like yesterday. So the book talks about first being visionary, pushing that thought process out, looking 360, so you have a 360-degree view of situational awareness. Create a habit every day thinking that way. Then take that and convert it into an actionable business strategy, and then back plan from that strategic set of objectives. And then once you've got that battle plan, then put the optimizers on it.
Hmm. It makes me think of like Kodak and Xerox, of big companies that were leading brands in their industry, right? Focus on being more efficient. And I'm sure that they had all the KPIs and they had all the rear view metrics that they were measuring, and all the bonuses were based on that. But yet the world was changing, right? And there was soon going to be no need for film, and photocopiers and things like that. And it's like so maybe they weren't looking out the windshield, but they were looking in the rearview mirror too much. Is that probably an example of companies that weren't really thinking strategically?
Yes. And it's also denial of the laws of the universe. I think it's Madame Curie's got a quote. I think I've got it right. The universe abhors stability.
Hmm.
There's no such thing as stability. The universe doesn't accept stability. It's in a constant state of adjustment, evolution, de-evolution. There's nothing static. So if you actually took a deep breath and thought about that for a second, that means nothing that you're relying on right now is really going to be reliable.
Hmm.
You're not in control. What you're trying to do is you're trying to basically surf a really big wave and see how long you can stay on it. And eventually that wave's going to start to go away, and you got to find another wave. And that's why the people that are into, futurists and things, they're looking for those big waves, those big trends, because that's what's going to sweep everybody up at some point. In every industry sector, sometimes in economies, regional or national, and sometimes globally. The information's out there. It's there to be seen, but you got to be thinking that way to even start to collect that as intelligence.
It's interesting you say that, because I'm seeing now, since like November of last year, people reacting to ChatGPT and AI, and what that likely can impact all sorts of different things. I mean, everything from academics to marketing to content creation, to there's so many things that's going to impact. And it's almost like we're, like you said, it sort of surprised us, that, oh, AI is here, and it could devastate my business. It could create tremendous opportunity. But I don't think, at least even myself as a business leader, was looking towards, well, that might happen here soon, and what's the impact. I wasn't thinking about that. I was thinking about, getting my revenues for the month, right? And making my
Exactly right.
sales numbers, right? So
Nobody
it's
when you saw the first cell phone, nobody thought that, hey, you know what? We could do our banking like this without ever having to go into a bank. That
yeah.
was 5 years down the road. All the things that we do on a cell phone, on a smartphone, those things, when those first popped out, even the inventors weren't even thinking that far ahead. Those applications came from everybody just thinking about what the platform could do. The whole thing about apps, it just exploded because people started
Yeah.
thinking, hey, and then if he could do it, I could do it, and I could do it with a whole different subject area.
It's really crazy to think of because again, I remember the day I got my first text. Right, I was on a business trip and I was supposed to meet up with my head of sales and my phone buzzed and I looked down. It was a text and I was like, "Well, how do you do that?" It's just amazing to see now where like we almost use words more than we do even a phone call,
Yeah,
right?
and it's happened so much faster. I told the story the other day. I was at a company as a senior exec, and I walked through a room and I saw 5 or 6 cubicle areas, and the desks were covered with piles of BlackBerries.
Oh,
And I realized that 2 years earlier, everybody had been fighting for who was rightfully should get a company BlackBerry.
right,
And the reason there was piles there is because now everybody wanted the Palm Pilot.
right.
Yeah, think about that.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
Palm Pilot didn't even get to stick around long enough to get a big pile because it went right to the iPhone. So I see that stuff, and you don't have the time you did back in the last century where it took 45 years for automobiles to be
right.
adapted and start to hit the S curve,
Mhm.
vertical. Yeah, it's fast, and you got to be on your toes. And if you're not looking around, that train's gonna hit you right in the face, and you won't even be able to react to it at that point. It'll just be done.
Yeah. So in the book you talk about decision making and how a strategic leader has to do decision making. I'm just curious to talk through a little bit about how we make decisions in a world where we're trying to think more strategically.
So again, I kind of go through this as a formula for leaders in the book on in Be Visionary. You have to deputize and then embolden your leadership team. And then they have to do the same thing to everybody else. The best situation is if you have let's say you have 50 employees, you want all 50 employees, as they say in the military, to have their head on a swivel. In this case, have their brain on a swivel. Everybody should be encouraged to be thinking the way we just described. If they hear something, they see something on TV, whatever, bring it to the attention of their supervisors. Supervisors, bring it to get it bubbling up, right? Because when you do that, you get some really crazy insights that you actually can develop into actionable strategy, or helps you either reinforce what you've been thinking is going to happen, or it tells you your assumptions were wrong. If you close it down to just the top people, your brain power, your brain trust, is a brain trust of however many people you've accepted in there. You also can't be the only guy at the top and say, I'm going to think all these big thoughts and then I'm going to tell everybody else what to do, because everybody else has to challenge your thoughts. Everybody has to punch holes in it. I talk about in there that to have your dream team, the people that are thinking these big thoughts and everything, but also you have to have your optimizers and your, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of mindset.
Right.
You hand it to them and say, here, beat it up, see if you can break it, scratch it, and then tell me what you found. So you have to be intellectually honest there. So that you're just not, kind of believing your own smoke kind of a thing, getting high on your dreams and all. You put those two elements together, the decision-making process is essentially a brainstorming process. It's not a single person, and it's very messy until you get, like I described earlier about the SEAL mission planning thing. It's very messy until you realize, okay, we have to come to some point where I say, I think this is where the needle's pointing.
Mm.
And then do we need to change anything about what we're doing? And then you put together an action plan and you issue milestones and directions, and you apply resources or you redirect resources to align with that. But it's a continuum. And I don't mean that you change your cardinal strategy for 2 years every day, but you should have everybody constantly looking out, because you may make a mistake even on your long-term view, even if it seemed to work out and pan out before. Think you went through this process a month before the pandemic, and you did everything I'm saying, and it's a wonderful outlook, and you know exactly where you're going to be in 24 to 36
Yeah.
months, and you've made the shift, and it's on paper, and everybody's saluted, and everybody's happy, and they're like, yes, we know we can, and then boom. The day that you realized that the world changed, which should have been sometime around the first week of April, everybody should have been brought into a conference room and told, everything's different, we need to reinvent.
Yeah.
We need to reimagine and reinvent. And let's brainstorm every bad thing that could possibly happen to us, supply chain, talent, everything. And then let's think, how do we do what we do as a company with all those things broken and missing.
Yeah.
You have to be that, that nimble and that capable and adaptable to realize what reality is. That's the Kodak thing. Fuji was kicking their butt. Fuji was coming out with digital, and they said, well, we invented digital, but they invented it for copier machines.
Right.
And so they said, well, nobody's ever going to do that. It's always going to be film, and we're better at film than Fuji. Well, then Fuji started beating them at film and then crushed them on the digital. So there were a bunch of people there that just didn't want to look and didn't want to recognize and didn't want to accept. So it's a continuum. It's a decision-making process that never ends. And it starts with that 10 minutes every day, thinking the big thoughts.
I really like that. I like that a lot. I know, for example, for our manufacturing business, when the pandemic hit, one of the things that happened right away is they canceled we have these, we train the technicians all over the country. So these we call them meter schools, and we go out physically and train technicians. Well, they shut all those training sessions down around the country. And so we started doing free virtual meter schools. And so we just offered that as a service for people who needed to get their education, but they couldn't go to these events. And what we realized is that we were the only ones in the industry doing it. And so everybody signed, I originally had like a Zoom account with 50, things. And I realized I had to open up to 100 people. So every time we ran it, we had 100 people sign up within 24 hours every time. And we built this reputation as being like the industry experts. And we were the smallest supplier in the industry, but it was like, we sort of like said, okay, what could we do differently? And it was sort of maybe that SEAL team creative thinking, like, what could we do in this scenario? And it turns out that's actually what elevated our stature as a company during the pandemic, because we were the only ones doing it. Even though the big companies had more resources than we had, we just sort of attacked the problem with what we had, which was, well, we have Zoom, let's use that.
So being that nimble and thinking strategically is actually a huge differentiator. And you're right. It's odd that it's rare, but it is. Every book about black swans will tell you all the case studies. It's 1/3 of the population of the case studies actually did what I described earlier. They came in, took a deep breath and said, the world's changed. Let's figure out what we got to do. The other 2/3 went into denial for either shorter or longer periods of time.
Yeah. And I think too, as a smaller company, I think you can go out in thin ice. You can do things that the big companies can't do because they've got too many departments, too many people thinking about it. But I think there's opportunities when these things happen for smaller firms to be able to be more nimble than some of the big companies, for sure. That's what we saw.
I think it may be easier to turn the patrol boat in the bathtub than to turn the battleship, right?
Yeah.
But I tell people all the time, my leaders and everything, when you go to talk to some big, huge corporation, you're just talking to a person.
Yeah.
They're a person in a department, in a division, and a division's in a regional organization. The regional organization is part of the parent organization. And they go, oh my God, it's Microsoft, or oh my God, no, you're not going to talk to Microsoft. There's not it's not like you're not going to a building that's all made out of steel with blinking lights and it's going, what do you want? Like the Great Oz. It's just a person. And so you can actually be all these things we're talking about. You can do that at the individual level, the team level, the project team level, the department and the divisional level. And you can absolutely do it. You don't have to wait for senior leadership to do it. And also senior leadership can do it. The CEOs, the C-suite of all these corporations could have pulled everybody in and said, this is what we're going to do, and inform the board. If you guys want to get involved in this, you got a lot of brain power, and we've got 2 weeks and we're going to come up with a way to deal with this. They could have done that. And they could start issuing a change of direction. And even if it's a battleship, but you know what? Everybody thought it was going to go away. Everybody hoped it was going to go away.
Yeah.
And they kind of got in the fetal position in the corner and went, wah, 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 didn't want to hear the noise. And anyway, it's a great case study. It was tragic that what it did to the country, but everybody that survived it, I guarantee you, it's gonna be like people that survived the Great Depression. There's going to be entrepreneurs in the next 10 years that you'll tie it right back to their start was figuring the world out during the pandemic.
Yeah, I really do see that. I really saw a lot of people really shifting and growing during that time. So using that as an opportunity for, like the landscape change. Okay, great. That's good for a small company, right? Because at least for my view was like the landscape changed, great. So now there's opportunity, and so for us who maybe, everybody knew what their position was in the market, right? And now the whole market shifted. So, okay, well, now maybe I've got a spot where I can kind of ease in. So
Near where I lived, there was a small sandwich shop, and it was surrounded with all these boutique restaurants of all kinds. And when they shut everything down, they took a bunch of plywood and put some 2x4s in the back of it, and they spray painted pickup, and they had a phone number. Well, nobody could get any food, if you remember, and
yeah.
you weren't even sure you could go to the grocery store and everything. And people would drive by and see it. And they put a folding table outside of the restaurant in the parking lot, and they had a couple of girls standing there. And you could call in and they would get your order. Now, I saw that the first time and I thought, oh, that's kind of interesting. It's like a bunch of kids selling Kool-Aid, but it's a real business. 2 months later, they had a tent, a huge tent. They had like 8 tables. They had bags of food to go stacked up on all these tables. They had a whole system. There were cars lined up
I love
all the
it.
way through the parking lot, trying to get in to pick up their orders like this. And all around them are restaurants. All around them are other restaurant owners. Nobody else is doing it. They did
Yeah.
it for the entire first year of the pandemic. And I'm thinking, me and my wife, we're going, nobody's copying them.
It's interesting. Same thing here. Nobody copied us with that training. I thought, well, for sure the big companies will take over. Like I just happened to be first, but nobody did. And we ended up being the only ones doing it, which was really weird.
Well, yeah, that's on you too. That's really good that you did that.
Yeah, interesting. So what are some other things that we should be thinking about when it comes to strategic leadership? We didn't get to cover everything in this discussion, but maybe some other points that are in the book that we should be aware of as leaders.
Well, I guess the key takeaway is strategy is about thinking big picture. It's about zooming out. You need to do it as an exercise, like I mentioned earlier. I suggest you do it every day, but as a team and everything, you should do it also. You don't have to go on a retreat. Companies that say we're going to retreat every year for a couple of days, that's not a habit. That's just a check in the box thing. So you need to do it as a regular thing. And when you do that, the whole organization will start to think strategically. Then they'll start thinking about what everybody else is doing around them strategically. The context will be a strategic context. You don't have to go to school to learn it. You don't have to be a genius to learn it. You don't have to be somebody with a fancy title to do it. So once you've empowered and enabled everybody to think this way, then make sure that you listen to what you're seeing and what you're sniffing on the wind. Don't ignore the actual information. Be intellectually curious. Suck it all in, take in all the different angles, talk to people that you would never talk to, look at industries that have nothing to do with your industry, and ask them things. What's your supply chain look like? Oh, well, we move rabbit food. Well, how do you do that? What do you run into? You'd be amazed at the kinds of things you find that are crossover solutions, because in the rabbit food industry 10 years ago, they had a crisis and they solved it this way. Now you're in that same crisis because you have a linear supply chain that you run into for the first time. But in the rabbit food industry, they solved it 10 years ago. And you never would have known unless you talked to somebody. So thinking strategically, acting strategically, and making decisions in a strategic way is a behavior pattern. It's a habit, and it's a continuum. That I can't say that enough. And I think if you do that, you're actually a strategist. You're a visionary, and turning a dream into a concept and a concept into a strategy is something everybody should be doing for themselves, and leaders definitely should be doing for their organizations.
Wow, such powerful advice. So listeners, I really encourage you to pick up this book. It's called Be Visionary: Strategic Leadership in the Age of Optimization. This is such a fantastic book. I know we just really scratched the surface of everything that's in there, but I think that, leaders, we can't just be looking in the rearview mirror. We got to be looking at the windshield. We got to be looking and considering what's happening in our world, and what are the opportunities, what are the threats, and what are we doing to basically act to make sure that we take advantage or mitigate the risk from these things that are coming our way. So, Marty, I really appreciate you being on the show. How can people find out more about you and your books?
Well, the books are all on Amazon.com, but if you go to martystrongbenimble.com, everything's there.
Okay, fantastic. We'll put links in the show notes for those resources. And again, I really highly encourage leaders that you start thinking strategically and you act like visionaries, and you pick up Marty's book, because I think this is going to help you be more effective in the long term. Marty, thanks for being on the show, and thanks for sharing both your books, but and all the wisdom that you provided today about strategic leadership. I think it gave us a lot to think about. I really do appreciate that.
Well, thanks for having me on, John. I really enjoyed it.
Well, thanks again. Well, that's it for today. Thank you for listening to Deep Leadership. If you like this podcast, please subscribe and share so we can continue to build a world with better bosses. Until next time, this is John Rennie saying take care and lead well.